Divine Mother,
friend, beloved God,
friend, beloved God,
great masters,
great masters,
Jesus Christ,
Jesus Christ,
Babaji Krishna,
Babaji Krishna,
Lahiri Mahashaya,
Lahiri Mahashaya,
Swami Shri Yukteswar,
Swami Shri Yukteswar,
beloved Guru,
beloved Guru,
Paramhansa Yogananda,
Paramahansa Yogananda,
saints of all religions,
saints of all religions,
beloved friend Swamiji,
beloved friend Swamiji,
bless our lives
bless our lives
with ever deeper attunement.
with ever deeper attunement.
Let your light shine through us,
Let your light shine through us
to everyone we meet,
to everyone we meet
in every situation.
in every situation.
Open our hearts
Open our hearts
and bring us into thy light,
and bring us into thy light,
into thy infinite bliss.
into thy infinite bliss.
Om.
Om.
Peace.
Peace.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming tonight. And for those who don't know, Nayaswami's Prem-shanti and Omprakash, we wouldn't be sitting here this evening if it weren't for them. They started the work in Rhode Island in 1990, and they were here for almost 10 years, leading retreats and teaching many of us here tonight Kriya, leading us into Kriya initiation. And they have been longtime devotees of Master. I think Prem-shanti 30 some odd years and Omprakash 40. They met at Ananda Village in 1990 and got married before coming to Rhode Island in 1999. And Giovanna, I'm sure you'll feel the same way. And Kelly, we think of you as and Lynn, as our spiritual parents here in Rhode Island. So we owe you a huge debt of gratitude for starting the work and continuing to send your prayers and your vibration our way so that I think we've been continuing your work for about 10 years now, which is hard to believe, isn't it?
It is. Time is so amazing.
So it feels like you just left, but it's been quite a while now. So with that, I'm going to just mute myself, and then you can fill in the other details. I just do want to mention that Prem-shanti and Omprakash they've led and served at Ananda Seattle, Ananda Portland, Ananda Palo Alto, Ananda Village, and they started the work in Rhode Island. So there's really no one better to talk about community than them this evening. So thank you.
So I would like to start by giving you all a little bit of a history of Ananda, Rhode Island, and how it came to be that the center there got started. It was one of those remarkable, amazing adventures where Master's blessings were there from the beginning, although the beginning was I moved from Maine, where I had been living, to Ananda Village. And for many years throughout my time at Ananda, I would ask Swami and Jyotish and Devi and anybody who would listen, when are we going to start something in New England or on the East Coast? And I was thinking Maine or someplace else or something. I wasn't thinking Rhode Island. But my parents had land in Rhode Island, in Hopkinton, and they had two pieces of property, and the smaller one was rented out, and they wanted me to inherit that. And they were getting older, and they had their estate plan and their inheritance figured out. I had brothers and sisters, and different people got different things. And for some years, I told them, well, I'm not interested in that property. I would just sell it and give the proceeds to Ananda or something. But in 1999, we had the inspiration. I had the inspiration that actually came during a pilgrimage to India to Yogananda's home. And we meditated at Yogananda's home. And I was thinking specifically about my mother, who had taken discipleship initiation at Ananda some years before. By that time, she had Alzheimer's and was in a nursing home. But I was remembering and honoring her discipleship. And a couple of nights later, we were in Darjeeling, and I had the thought, well, why don't I take that property and make an Ananda center there? And I was kind of all jazzed about this and didn't dare tell Prem-shanti anything because we were at the tail end of this wonderful pilgrimage, and I didn't want to throw her life up in the air, but I just kept thinking, wow, maybe this could work. Ananda had sent us and two other people, Ram and Seva, to a place in the Poconos in Pennsylvania about 3 or 4 years earlier as a possible site. There was a fellow there who wanted to sell his property to Ananda and have it be an Ananda center. Well, that didn't really work out, but there'd been some history. And so when we got back to America, I asked the big question to Prem-shanti, and it was a big thing for her. This was my family's land, and I had connections in Rhode Island, and I loved the area and stuff, but she was a Southern California tropical girl who'd never been further north than Ananda Village. Anyway, one thing led to another. Swami approved it. Jyotish and Devi had several meetings with us. Jaya came out with me to explore the possibilities, and it happened. We moved. We did a lot of preparatory work. Jaya and I came out and met with a lawyer and incorporated the Ananda Church of Self-Realization of Rhode Island and then we brought a yurt, a 30-foot yurt with us, and we moved into the small house that is the main house that some of you know and some of you maybe have driven by in 1999. Well, things worked out really well. A whole bunch of Ananda people, ministers and carpenters, and just everybody, a lot of people came to help. We had a tremendous amount of help from one of the reasons that we had started the center there. There was no Ananda anything in Rhode Island. But there were some strong meditation groups in Maine and Massachusetts, which have been going for quite some time.
And DC also.
And DC, but we didn't know the DC people very well. But we had come back to visit my family in Rhode Island and go up to visit the meditation groups in Maine and Massachusetts numerous times. And that was sort of the nucleus of the energy that those people came down. Guru Priya, Luba and Dimitri, Kay Gordon,
Jane Din Downey.
Tracy Anderson, who then later moved to St. Louis. Anyway, those groups and many people from Ananda came, and we did a lot of construction projects, and we set up the yurt and had a temple and high duty. We were off and running by the summer of 1999.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
So I think he's giving you a lot of details, but what it all comes down to, and I think this is relevant for you all and what you're doing, is that behind the success of anything that happens in community, I think, is the spiritual aspect. And all along the way, there were challenges. All along the way, we often didn't know what we thought we were going to do next. But as long as we as a group got together and prayed and meditated about it, a solution would come. And that's why I'm sort of excited for you guys, because I think this is possibly what you're describing wanting to do, and I'd love to hear more from you all later, is it feels like this next step for you all spiritually and as a group. And I just can't tell you how wonderful those years were. They were trying and it was hard. And often I'd be in the temple praying like, oh my gosh, Master, what are we going to do about this? But people would come and events would happen. And there's just nothing like that experience to really deepen your love for God, your love for each other, and to draw the strengths from each other. And I know that each of you in this group has special qualities. And if you will offer those special qualities to your group, you'll all form an energy that will be a wonderful magnet, and it will bless the area that you're in. I'm sure that the church and all the things that you guys are doing now are sending out blessings. But if you decide that you're going to have a community there, and part of your thing is every day you're meditating together and having sadhana get together and improving it, then those vibrations are going out into the world. And it's a wonderful adventure. I'm excited for you.
So I'd like to continue the story
Okay.
a little bit. Not that I don't agree with every word she just said, but having landed and started and done some initial construction, what we had there in Hopkinton was essentially a retreat center. And we had weekend retreats frequently, several times a month, almost every weekend sometimes. And people would come from far away. The parking lot would be filled with out-of-state license plates. People came from the meditation groups in Maine and Massachusetts. People came from Connecticut and New Jersey and further away. But we were missing Rhode Island, which is a small state, but we just didn't know anybody there. But gradually, over the course of time, one thing that was significant is that after about a year or two, in 2001, Swami Kriyananda came for the first time. He came 3 times in the spring of 2001, 2, and 3. And he encouraged us the first time he came to start doing regular Sunday services. And we were a little bit dismayed at that because we had this little property all to ourselves for many, many days out of the month. And we didn't know who would be there at Sunday service besides the 2 of us. But that was very good advice. And that, in fact, was the beginning of the magnetism that began to draw people from the more local area. And Kyle and Giovanna will remember many people, Jane Green, Carol Shern. Kelly came later. Actually, Kyle came later, but but the Sunday services became an integral part of the development of community there, because we would have weekend retreats where people would drive a long distance and they'd be there for from Friday afternoon to Sunday. And the local group would come for Sunday services. And increasingly, they would bring dishes for lunch. And the lunch experience turned out to be a very central community building tool, because people would come for the weekend and they'd be, it would be small groups. Sometimes it would be 3, 4, 5, 8 people for a weekend retreat, and we'd eat together and but it would be people who hadn't necessarily known each other before the weekend. But then on Sunday, and at Sunday lunch, there'd be a whole group of people, many of whom did know each other, and the lunches were very dynamic. And people could sense the building of a community there. When we left in 2008, we left because basically Swami had put out a lot of energy when he was there to encourage people to move there and to make it a community. And basically, the East Coast was not ready for community as much in those days. Giovanna was, bless her heart, about the only person who actually moved onto the property, also Cherry Whitney. But we couldn't get people. People in New England would tell us over and over again, well, my family needs me here, and I'd love to join you all and move there, but it's more important that I be here because my aunt's sick, or my family needs me. So a community was not developing, and Jyotish and Devi and Swami felt that we were getting too isolated ourselves, being there year after year, alone a lot of the time. And although we loved it and it was a great nucleus building, they encouraged us to let it go. So we did. But the Sunday services and the lunch group from the local people was strong enough magnetically. Roy Dubs stepped in. For a while, we met at Kelly's house in the transition when we were packing up the things there. And then Roy offered his place, and the Ananda Church of Self-Realization survived and grew for many years in nearby Roy's barn, just 2 miles down the road. And then eventually, with the purchase of the church, there brings us up to date. The one thing that I want to say about all of that is that, important as community is on the spiritual path, its definitions, its forms are varied and unique. There is a strong, most of you, I want to say this. Before we came to Rhode Island, the only real model for an Ananda community is, hi Roy, hi Inez. Swami Kriyananda, as you know, started Ananda Village in the late 60s. Almost immediately, he began to encourage people to teach classes in Sacramento and San Francisco. And he recognized from the beginning that Ananda, wonderful as Ananda Village was, it wasn't ever going to be just one location. And he encouraged the development of centers in other locations. And in the mid 80s, there was a very dramatic time when he sent out 4 couples to start colonies in Portland and Seattle. Actually, Palo Alto and Sacramento were already going. To this day, those colonies, which are vibrant and thriving and have anywhere from 50 to 150 people living in them, they all have a similar form of having a old fixer-upper apartment complex on a lot of land with a lot of trees and short 2-story buildings that have been purchased by members of the local meditation group who formed a community. But there have been no new communities of that nature for 30 years, and it seems highly unlikely that in today's, never mind COVID, just because of the difficulty with land use and zoning and permitting and things, it's almost impossible to buy a property by a large group of people and form a community. So the thing that Swami stressed over and over again, he emphasized that Master had said to him, you must be practical in your idealism. And again, Swami has led the way in saying, find something that works. Never mind the history, never mind the models that have existed in the past. Find something that works. And to create a community in Rhode Island, you might very well end up finding a way, manifesting something that doesn't look like anything else that's ever existed in the Ananda world. You have a church, which is a wonderful thing. I don't believe there's another single building that is a church building that is owned by the local group anywhere in the country. There are centers who have rented a space, but to move from there to any kind of a group living situation is a big step. One thing that was asked by someone, and I wanted to comment, is in Hopkinton, when we had our retreat center on 40 acres of land there, that 40 acres was very subject to the local town government, to the planning department and the town council. And we ran into a fair amount of resistance to having a group of unrelated adults living together as a community. We didn't really get to that point, but we were moving in that direction, and the zoning and the permitting and stuff was awkward and unfriendly. But people who had money and wanted to join our group were able to buy properties across the street. There were 3 houses that were purchased by various Ananda couples or members, and that was a very important adjunct to our community. They just happened to be across the street, so they could walk over to the community, to the center. And that was a very helpful model. And in fact, as you look at opportunities in Rhode Island, you want to find some way near the church that people can actually live together. And whether that's in the same house or a couple of houses next door or a bunch of people buying individual houses, it's hard to find how that would work. But the important thing is that there's so much potential in being able to live together, to chant and meditate, and but just sharing the light, the adventure of living outside the actual church building. People inspire each other in so many ways and build a magnetism for the spiritual path that uh, is a vital part of making practical spiritual living. This is why Swami picked up on that idea of masters so much, and he'd been thinking about it for a long time, and he was able to manifest such a wonderful example of it. But here in Rhode Island, whatever form it takes, uh, we want to offer all the encouragement that we can to find a way to be able to share beyond just coming together at the church a few times a week. So,
We did talk with Jaya a little bit. He was very happy to hear what direction you guys might be going in. And he said, I want to give you this practical thing before I forget to tell you. He said, whatever they decide they're going to do as a group, before they actually buy it, find out who the town planner is in that area and go talk with them. Because he didn't want you all to have to go through some of the hoops that we had to go through and some of the resistances we had. He said, that's a very practical thing. And he wants it, he wants you guys to succeed, in other words. So that'd be something that you'd want to do, is do your research and see, how the townships are divided. And if you find certain properties, just find out what the zoning is, go to the town planner and find out what that town is like and what their requirements are. And I'm sure Roy could be a big help to you all, because he's had a lot of different properties in that area and he's very knowledgeable. So the other thing that I would say about community is you learn to depend on each other, but as far as, because this is an adjunct, from Ananda, we couldn't have done what we did in Rhode Island if we didn't have the magnetism and support from many ministerial couples who came and led very magnetic programs and so forth. So just do your best to stay in touch with people at Ananda who, not just us, but Pranaba is very interested in what you all might be doing too. And I know many of you know them. And keep that connection together, because that will help you in making your decisions and in feeling the support that can come to you from people who've done it and done it in many different areas and who have been on the path a long time. I know especially when Jaya and his wife moved to Rhode Island, a depth of spiritual energy came in that we didn't have before. And because they're 20 years longer on the path than we were. So it's like, just to have all of that. I mean, Kelly's got a lot of experience, Kyle and Giovanna, Roy, Inez, lots of people. Duty. Yeah, Duti's been everywhere. And so anyway, that's another part of the joy of what you're doing, is that those relationships will deepen. And it's just a wonderful thing that you're starting.
Another thing I'd like to mention is that we have also had the opportunity to, when we were in Portland and when we were in Seattle, we participated in searches for either a church or a community. And while the details of that aren't relevant, what is relevant is the fact that the very search and finding a place and getting all excited about it and then having it not work out was an important part of actually building this sense of community and working together. People who only knew each other from the church would go out and look at a property, and they'd meet and they'd talk about it, and they'd go back and they'd talk about it, and that helped build a level of trust and connection, so that each time we found something and it didn't work out or it wasn't right or whatever, by the time the property was purchased, there was a much greater sense of involvement and community and participation by the people that had been to all those, or at least some of those other things.
The amazing thing that happened for us too, because we've been a part of the searches in many areas now, is that it was a process for the group to tune in and to pray and meditate together. And it happened organically, that, you know, if one person would say, I don't know, I think we should this could be a problem. If we all just got together and did a prayer and meditated together about it, we would usually come to a harmonious agreement about what our next steps were and what we might try that we hadn't already tried. And just that process alone was worth so much in looking back on our spiritual life. So, yeah.
So do any of you have questions?
I just want to make a comment. Thank you, Prem-shanti and Omprakash, also for speaking about the model of buying property across the street. Because during that time, I know that was successful while it lasted. I know people eventually left, but that was successful. And that could be a model that would work for us too. There's a lot of places around where we have our church, you know, within 20 miles or 15 miles. And we are going to invite Jaya and Sadhana Devi as our next speakers. David will help me pick a date probably after the holidays now, but we would like to hear their perspective as well. David has been wonderful of sort of keeping everybody together. He's a weekly email. He makes these video chats where after we have looked at, I think about, what do you think, guys, about 4 or 5 properties so far, some just land, some one, and it's been really extreme, like, you know, $1 million property down to it. So, and I really believe it's important that we see the whole spectrum so that we can, when we find the right situation, we'll all feel it in our heart. So thank you for saying that, because it is really important that we kind of all go through that process together of kind of finding things out. And it's okay to think really big, and then slowly just the right thing Master will present to us. So thank you for talking about all those points.
Yeah, I can still remember being in Portland when the whole group, we'd been searching for a church and for a community, and we were part of the church and the community search. And there was just nothing like it. When you would be in the group, everybody would sit down and you'd meditate about what you had just been through to look at. And when there's just such a sweetness when everybody comes out and said, yes, this is it. I mean, it's just like Master's coming down and telling you, you know, and you just have to put out those feelers. It's a wonderful process. Yeah, while you're in it, it can seem confusing, but it isn't really confusing. There's just, the universe is waiting to help this happen for you all.
When Kelly first saw the church for sale, and she called, I think it was Annette, Giovanna, and Roy and I, and when we first got together to talk about it, right away we all felt so excited. And then we started bringing the rest of the group in. People came in to meditate in the church. We had several big meetings, and it was a little bit difficult because some people were so attached to Roy's barn, which was so sweet.
Yeah,
Sacred to all of us. But ultimately, as a group, everyone made that decision together. And at first we didn't know how we would come up with the money. And then literally we all prayed and suddenly we had the money. So
yeah.
It was a great experience.
It's a great example of the magnetism leading you. Yeah, go ahead, Kelly.
Well, I was walking my dogs and going to Ryan Park, and I saw the for sale sign, and I got out of my car, and just like when Master and Sri Yutesh were on the market, I just couldn't continue the walk. I put my dogs back in the car. I called the real estate person. She said she was right around the corner. I walked into place. I called Kyle. And I said, Kyle, I think we found our church. And she said, how much? I said, it's cheap. And that was all I remember. It was just an absolute knowing when Inez and Giovanna walked in the door too, like all of us just knew.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is how it's going to lead. You're going to be led with this situation too. And it may be that, you know, depending on your own situations, there may be a family that has small children. They just need their own little house, but close by. And then there might be, you know, couples that two couples decide, okay, I think we can live harmoniously together and we can pool our resources. It's just going to happen organically for you. It'll be beautiful to see how it unfolds and how the energy is led. And as long as you have that intention and the more that you put into your meditation, I mean, some of the groups that we've had, we've actually made up an affirmation when we were doing our search that was going to help us. And we would all, at our healing prayer time, say the affirmation and do a visualization and ask Master to guide us to find what our next step was. And it was a very powerful process. So, yeah, good.
One piece of advice that Jaya gave us right at the beginning, and it turned out to be true again and again and again. He said, just remember that everything always takes longer and costs more.
So, anybody else have more questions?
I'd like to chime in here, and just echo what you guys are saying about meeting somewhat regularly and meditating on the topic. And, we had put out some energy initially. Duty was really the one who was like the beachhead of energy that pulled all this group together. And I think all of us really resonated with what she was talking about. And I would just want to echo the idea of doing maybe a weekly meditation, or piggybacking on our own personal meditations. That's, I like to send an email out every now and then because like I feel so passionate about this. I really want the energy to keep going, and maybe some people would be interested in doing that. Just a little half-hour meditation once a week, or if it's better to do it after your own personal meditation.
Yeah, we had an affirmation at one point, and so that'd be great, David, if you could send that out again, and maybe we could just, like you said, just everybody focus on it for really strongly at the end of their meditations.
You've got to unmute yourself, Inez. We can't hear you. There you
Yes.
go.
When you came to Hopkinton, was that land your property, or did you find that land? And if you found it, how long did it take you to come to it?
It was my
Land
family's.
in Hopkinton, when you first arrived in Rhode Island from California.
He knows what you're asking.
It was my family's land,
Oh,
and they had wanted me to inherit it. So we made the classic. I don't want to say it was a mistake because it wasn't a mistake, but it is very rarely a good idea to start with a property first and then find the people to be there. Community gets built by the people first, and then you magnetize a situation on a property. And we came to that land because it was available to us for free, and because it was close enough to other Ananda groups to be worth giving it a try. But we didn't have to, find and purchase and go through all that stuff.
I
So
see.
it isn't a useful model, but
Well, it is in a way. I mean, every step that anybody takes that builds a community of some sort leaves you with some knowledge that helps you. We're a part of the building of the community, the finding of the community and the finding of the church in Portland. And that's where I told you where we always got together and meditated. And then when we went to see the properties, we got together again after each person has seen the property, and we discussed it first, and then we meditated. And it was very interesting to see the difference between what our minds were telling us, like some places that maybe weren't very attractive in some ways, but vibrationally, they had a lot of potential. Ended up being more interesting if you all sat down to meditate about it those things would start to come to the surface. So it's very, and in Seattle, the same way, we looked for years for farmland, and we would come very close to buying something, and then something would happen and it just stopped feeling right. And so we'd say, no, we can't do that yet. And so, but then once we finally got all the elements together that we needed, and people were really focused and meditating on it, a solution came. And once the floodgates opened, they found the farm that's perfect for them now. And now it's got its own little community starting right there. So it's an organic process that's led by spirit. And as long as you keep that spirit, you'll be led to what's right for you. And even if it looks like you're going about it in somewhat of a different way, so what? Spirit's going to flow through it and it's going to turn out.
Thank you.
I just have to address that, what you said, Om Prakash, because, obviously Master had a plan, and because we're independent Yankees, we're going to do it different than the model, right? And so Rhode Island, I mean, the way it started was just as valid. And I mean, look, it's still alive and thriving. And even though it wasn't the traditional model of how the Ananda communities usually start. But I just wanted to say, it seemed like you were kind of putting down the process or something, but it all feels divinely inspired.
Did you want to say something, Kyle? No.
I was agreeing with Duty that it happened perfectly the way it was supposed to.
Yeah.
Because look at what you created, those of us that are here, and, so grateful for what you started and how it's, really changed our lives and informed our lives. And like Duty said, we have such an amazing group, and we have look at the faces here. We have new devotees, and many of them aren't here tonight, but we have so many beautiful souls that have been attracted to the church in North Kingstown because of the location too.
Yeah.
Wonderful too. And that just, again, Master just dropped that in our lap. So
Yeah. Well, that church has such a beautiful vibration. I love that church. I just can picture and feel what it's like to be in there. It's got an amazing vibe.
We were sorry not to have been able to come back this year because of COVID. We didn't make our what has become sort of an annual trip to the East Coast. And we were disappointed not to have been able to come to the church for at least one service and connect with you all, but couldn't do it. We'll see what next year. But thank you, David, for being able to get this Zoom thing. This is quite an important step.
And Om Prakash and Prem-shanti, we missed you. So
Yeah.
and of course we knew that you couldn't come. No, we can't go there right now, and you can't come here right now. But we miss you. So it's an absolute joy to have you right here in my little sitting room, seeing you both right up front, right up front and personal. It's great. It's great.
It is good.
And my vision about the housing, which I don't know, this won't happen, but as you've been talking about it, all of you have been talking about it, I don't know how you all think about it, but I think about that church right there on the corner. And I think it would be nice if we could have a little blue house next to it. And then when you turn the corner and you go down, there's that other little house down there that's right on the water. If we could have those two houses, that would be super duper. I don't know, what could we do to them? Not to them, what could we do to encourage them to move out and sell it to us?
Well, I can tell you a story about that. You can move the energy. This was something that happened about Rhode Island, and it segues in there. The property that we came to move to, Omprakash's family had been renting it to the same couple for 6 years, and they did not want to move, even though his father gave them 6 months free rent, and they were coming up on 5.5 months, and they still hadn't found another place to be. So I got together with Mary Kretzmann, if you guys know Mary Kretzmann, who's the head of the Healing Prayer Ministry, and she and I did a visualization. We got together, we prayed, we asked Master to flow through us and to guide us. And she led me through a visualization where because I'd seen the house and I knew what the house was like, in our minds, we asked Master to come into that house, and we blessed every room with his vibration. We filled it with light. And then I started to giggle at the end because I said to her, Master is sitting on the roof of that house, just like Santa Claus. And then I saw him with his hands like this, blessing the area. And within 2 weeks, they had found a place to live because we changed the vibration in the house and they were ready to go. But I'm convinced that our meditation helped that. So if you want those little houses, you have to surround them in light.
Well, yes. Dharmically, that place was ours. Legally, that place was ours. You don't want to push your neighbors out with divine energy if that's not the right. Careful of that.
I'm not saying push them out. I'm just saying put it up there and say, Master, these are awfully cute houses. Don't you think it would be nice for us?
Those houses were both for sale. The house if you're facing our church to the left was for sale, right, Kelly? Just before our building, and then when we were renovating the church, that little house behind us went up on the market. And so they're young families, and they're going to grow out of those houses someday.
Right.
I guess I'm just saying it's the power of prayer. I mean, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt to ask. You can just say, if it's not this house, Master, how about something else? But things can happen. It's just pretty amazing.
The house on the other side of the street, the guy who doesn't want us to park, everyone knows where that house has, like, an in-law apartment and another unit above the garage. So you could have 3 different people living in the house really easily. Plus they have land. So that's the one to focus on.
Well, if you change the vibration enough, he'll want to move. It's all part of the process. And I'd say, those are the kinds of feelings to walk the neighborhood and just get a feeling for it, and to also pray as you're walking. Pray and bless people. It changes how the inspiration will come to you. And just like Kelly was just open that day when she was walking her dogs, but because her heart was so open, the inspiration flew right in, and then boom, 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 everything moved. So it is all magnetism and vibration. So anything can happen. Mm-hmm.
I'm Carol. I haven't met you, but it's wonderful to be with you both tonight. You mentioned challenges of zoning and communities not liking adults living together on land. And I'm thinking about that's so strange because I lived in Manhattan for a long time. I mean, you have 6,000 people in a building and you call it a condo association. Mm-hmm. Or if it's in the suburbs, it's a gated community or another type of homeowner association. And I'm wondering if that's one way you can get around that reticent to have people living together.
I think that could be a possibility. I think that Jaya had a very good suggestion, though, when he said to really check out the town planners and see how conservative the area you are. Speaking of challenges, not to give the area, I'll just say this one thing. When we were giving classes in yoga and meditation, there was I guess I shouldn't even mention the denomination. There was a specific church in Westerly that didn't believe in meditation. And every time we would put our flyers up in an area that was near their church, within a half hour, they would be down. They would be gone. So there's an inner, you just have to kind of feel what the vibration of the area is. And it certainly can be overcome. We certainly led a lot of meditation classes and a lot of yoga classes anyway. But it's just nice not to have, if you can avoid going into an area where so many things are stacked against you, then it's easier. So just, I think that's what I would like to say about that, is that it's a consideration, but it isn't like a game, it doesn't stop you if it's what's trying to happen in the divine scheme. But you might as well go into areas where it's more liberal, perhaps, or that it can be easier for you.
Another thing that I would say is that in our case, we had from the beginning land that was owned by a church. And because it was owned by a church, we were required by the town to have a special use permit to use it in the way for community that we wanted to do. And that special use permit was what was a challenge. One question that you all will be faced with is, if you find a property, is it going to be purchased by the church in the name of the church, or is it going to be purchased by an individual? And that's a tricky thing, because if it's going to be an individual, then you're going to have a lot of trust in that individual, and there's leadership issues. If you get to that point, Pranaba and Jaya and people at the village will be helpful. But you could have, for instance, Roy's barn. We were able to do things in Roy's barn because that was owned by Roy. That didn't require going before the town. But sharing, if you wanted to buy a house and then have 3 or 4 different people living there, and you want to have a little apartment added on for another person that wants to be there, that's the kind of thing that can get into challenges with towns. But with Master's Grace, Ananda has faced this so many times in every single colony, again and again, and just trying to do what's right and praying and having Master and Babaji's blessings. Obstacles turn into opportunities and solutions get found. So don't let any of that stop you.
No, I would like to say hello. My name is Anastra. I'm in New Hampshire, and I have visited the church in North Kingston several times. But after my first visit, I've already decided that sometime next year, I really have a strong desire to move, and was very interested in this discussion. And I thank you so much. You've given such wonderful practical as well as the spiritual piece of it. It's just a beautiful blend. I'm retired now, but I have worked in property management.
Oh.
And so I wonder, because I even thought, like, in a previous lifetime, this lifetime, I was with a Buddhist community, and we had these similar discussions. But I've often thought that an apartment building where each person has their privacy, and it can take in families as well, but you meet up with each other. You leave your apartment and you go. So in one particular building, there were 40 apartments, very lovely, and it was senior housing. So it had HUD, project-based housing. So 30% of their income is so. So anyways, I just was thinking outside the box what that would be like. And I wondered if, in your experience, as well as with others from Ananda, had ever moved into, explored an apartment building as opposed to something already existing in that capacity.
Most of our communities have been, especially the urban ones, have an apartment complex.
Oh.
And yeah, it works beautifully.
Yeah.
One of the things that has been the standard model for Palo Alto, Sacramento, Portland, and Seattle is to buy an apartment complex and then take 2 apartments and reconfigure them as a community dining room. And that has been a very important part of creating the sense of community, because if people can eat together, They have their separate living quarters, but if they can eat together and have a
meditate
place to
together.
have, well, they meditate together at the church or privately. There is, in fact, a temple too, an apartment temple in each of those places. But the dining room takes some creativity to make a bigger space, and it's used for meetings and quite a number of things. But again, it's so interesting for me that the lunches in Hopkinton were the sort of the glue that held the group together to make the transition to Roy's.
Well, that was the practical part, but the spiritual part was really what held everybody together there. It's both. I think that's why I love Ananda so much, is that it, people can be as deep spiritually as they choose to be. And we all try to see the best in each other and encourage each other spiritually. But then we all try to do the practical aspect of life too. It's not, they're not separate. Your spiritual life and your everyday life can be together, and it's a great adventure when they are.
We had the best family Sunday lunches ever.
Yes. But also just the vibration of Kriya Yoga, and the fact that, oh, that's one thing I wanted to mention because I did put it in my notes. Anytime there is an Ananda presence, I think one of the best aspects of it is that it's not just for Ananda or just for members of Ananda. It's very open-hearted and welcoming to others to come and participate in whatever they want, but also to have blessings being given to those people. And that's what I meant when I said what you're doing can be a great blessing for that whole area, because it'll bless your own life, but just naturally it raises the vibration. Every place that Ananda has built a community, the vibration in that area has gone up, land values have gone up, new families have moved in. It just changes the whole area, and it's wonderful for us as a community and for each of us as individuals. But as long as we keep that in mind, that that we're also serving a larger community, it brings blessings both ways.
I'd just like to chime in for a moment, you guys. I felt like I had all these questions, and they now appear to be all circumstantial questions. And what I'm hearing is like the leadership at Ananda Rhode Island always tells us, just to tune in, keep tuning in, keep tuning in. And my mind wants to sort of ask about rural versus city dwellings, and
Yes.
yeah, it just seems like we really need to come together and meditate and keep building the magnetism, and then those things will be revealed to us.
No, there is a certain extent to which things will be revealed, but it's also very important that I'm not sure what you meant exactly by circumstantial questions, but such questions as urban versus rural, we haven't touched on that. And those are important things to talk about. In the end, certain opportunities will come up, and that will be, you may have all decided that you want something that looks just like this, and then something that looks different comes up, and that's what ends up manifesting. But no, by all means, you should ask those questions. Rural versus urban is an important thing. You could end up buying a couple of houses in Wickford and having several people living there. You could end up having a large farmhouse 10 miles away out in the woods where you can have some cabins and something like that. There's a lot of different forms that it can take, and it is good to explore your questions. David, do you have more?
Well, I mean, I guess what I was touching on is that that questions arise as in proportion to what the need is, and in proportion to who is actually interested. So without getting into theory or desire, which I'm trying to avoid for myself, is, it just seems like once the energy keeps building, that we'll be naturally drawn. Like, I had no idea Nostra was considering moving in the area. Shannon and I are pretty heart set on moving to the area in the spring or summer next year. So I guess that's what I was kind of touching on, is it's hard to say, I love farming. I love carpentry and working the earth and planting garden beds and that sort of thing. But would you say that there's a certain degree of, that we're in service? We're not trying to just, maybe you can get a sense of what I'm trying to ask, that we're not here to just like kind of make heaven on earth, but we're here to also serve what Master has specifically for that area and for the people involved, right?
That's right. Definitely right.
There is a great deal of growth that comes from setting aside your personal desires, your dream situation, and going with what the group seems to be doing in a somewhat different direction. But it's also important to emphasize that Master and Swami both talked repeatedly about challenges in the future and the importance of having farming capability. We did not mention that Swami put out a lot of energy, and each of those urban communities that exists also has a farm property nearby. And growing your own food and the opportunities to be involved together in a rural situation where there's more land is definitely a good thing. The apartment complexes that I referred to for Ananda, Portland, and Seattle, and Sacramento, and Palo Alto, they are all quite a few acres. They are not your standard high-rise apartment complex. They are small buildings separated by trees and walkways and grassy areas, and there's a rural character to them, even though they're in suburban communities. So definitely get an important item on the list should be a place with land that can be used for gardens. And I don't know if you remember, but very few of you were there. One of the things we had at Ananda, Rhode Island is we had nature, we had trails, and we had celebrations where we would have different altars to each of the masters in different areas. You'd walk around to different parts of the yards, and I'm not trying to say that a rural place, land and usable acreage, yards, is important. Yes, and David, I appreciate what you say about getting away from the theory and the desires. If you think that you want to be part of a community and the community is looking to buy something that doesn't fit all your choices, that is a very common thing that happens. You look at the Ananda communities, many of you, probably very few of you, except Duty, maybe Kyle, maybe Giovanna, have been to some of these Ananda communities, but these urban so-called communities have apartments that are 2-bedroom apartments. They're by definition, for Ananda to be able to afford them, they are small. They got 1 bathroom. Many people who were part of the Ananda group at the time gave up a full regular Ananda house, an American house with a yard and a nice place, a nice house, and they moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment. And that was a huge, huge sacrifice for those people. Many of those people said, there's no way I would live in one of those little tiny places. And from what I've got now, to sell that and move into a little, are you kidding? But when it became clear that that was the only option for living together, and when they saw others doing it and finding that the value of the community, that the power of the magnetism of the community was so great, in Seattle, where we lived for a number of years, we helped lead groups that would meet in different members' apartments. And these apartments would be a small room. Many of you that I see on this screen, imagine 20 people crowded into that room. These different groups would be members of the Ananda community that were not residents of the community, but they would be members of the larger church, and they'd come for various classes and meetings in these apartments. And people would come again and again and say, well, I love my house, and I wouldn't really like to live in one of these little apartments, but I'd love to be part of the community. The energy that I feel here and seeing you all together, and you don't have to drive through traffic to come to Ananda to be here. Are there any openings? And again, that's where people's desires don't get, it's not so much that you have to squelch a desire as you begin to gradually realize that the desire to be with your friends in a community, that the benefits spiritually override your desires for having this and that and the other living situation.
And I just have to say, people, you get really creative when you have, a small space. You find you can actually do a lot of creative beautification and landscaping. And I mean, all of the communities have gardens, and in Palo Alto, they unpaved one whole driveway and turned it into the community garden. And so, yeah, God helps us figure out how to make things just the best they can be.
I think maybe one final thing I'd like to say is just that when Asha Praver gave the dedication, well, no, Swami gave the talk. I can't remember. The two of them at the dedication of the Palo Alto community. No, I'm sorry, it was definitely Swami. He said, Babaji is very pleased with this community. We all look to Yogananda as our guru. He came charged by his guru and by Babaji with bringing this mission to the West. But Babaji is very aware of the technology, of the needs of the age, and he is very happy that this community is being formed right here in Silicon Valley, which is one of the forefronts of the world's directions today with technology and stuff. And this effort to build community and to spread this spiritual living is very much what Babaji has in plan for the planet. And it is a very powerful wave that we all have the opportunity to participate in even some little small way. But this is Babaji's work. It's Master's work. It's Babaji's work. It's Jesus's work. It's a worldwide Dwapara mission that involves far more than just a little Sunday service, but spiritualizing all aspects of living. And so remember that you're part of this wonderful big wave.
Well, we're about an hour in, you guys. Does anybody else have any final questions that they'd like to ask?
Not so much a final question, David, but I just want to applaud your suggestion about meeting once a week and meditating and building based on what we've heard tonight. I think it's a wonderful idea.
I do too. Shall we end with a prayer?
That's great.
Let's end with a prayer. Heavenly Father,
Heavenly Father,
Divine Mother,
Divine Mother,
Friend, Beloved God,
Friend, Beloved God,
Great Masters,
Great Masters,
thank you for your presence in our lives.
thank you for your presence in our lives.
Each of us tuning in to you
Each of us tuning into you
with open hearts
with open hearts.
will draw your inspiration.
We draw your inspiration.
Help us to serve you
Help us to serve you
in small ways and in large
in
ways,
small ways and in large ways.
and help us to always be in touch with
Help us to always be in touch with
your loving presence,
your loving presence,
your guidance,
your guidance,
and your joy.
and your joy.
For those are the qualities
For those are the qualities
for all spiritual communities.
for all spiritual communities.
Om. Peace.